You are being watched right now. Not by a camera. Not by a government. By someone in your life, someone you probably trust, who has already run a quiet assessment on you. Who has already identified exactly what you need, what you fear, and what you will do to avoid feeling that fear. They haven't told you this. They never will. But I'm going to tell you something they never wanted you to know. I'm going to show you their playbook. Not from the outside. From the inside. For the next 15 minutes, I am the manipulator. And you are going to see exactly how I see you. Pay attention. Because by the end of this, you will never be readable again. Part 1. The Scan. Before I say a single word to you, I already know if you're worth my time. I don't walk into a room looking for victims. That word, victim, is for amateurs. Sloppy. Emotional. I'm not looking for someone to hurt. I'm looking for someone useful. Someone whose psychological architecture fits what I need. And I can identify that person in under 3 minutes. Here is what I'm actually doing when I first enter a space where you are. I watch how you enter. Not what you say. Not what you wear. How you move through a door. Do you scan the room or look at the floor? Do you wait to be acknowledged or do you claim space immediately? Do you smile before anyone smiles at you? Machiavelli wrote in chapter 22 of The Prince that you can read the quality of a mind by observing how it handles uncertainty. The doorway is uncertainty. How you handle it tells me almost everything. The person who enters looking for approval, eyes scanning for familiar faces, body slightly contracted, smile ready and waiting to be deployed, that person has already told me something critical. They need to be seen. And they will do a great deal to feel seen. That is my first data point. Then I watch how you listen. When someone else is speaking, do you wait for your turn, or do you actually listen? Do you nod too much? Do you finish sentences? Do you laugh slightly before the punchline to signal you understood? Excessive listening signals, the over-nodding, the mirroring, the enthusiasm, these are not signs of warmth. They are signs of anxiety. Of someone who needs the interaction to go well badly enough that they're working to ensure it. That need? That is leverage. Then I create a small moment of mild social discomfort, and I watch what you do. I might pause a second too long before responding to something you said. Or give a slightly ambiguous reaction to a statement you made, not negative, just unclear. Unreadable. Watch what happens. The person who needs the interaction to go well will immediately work to resolve the ambiguity. They will explain themselves more. Soften their statement. Ask if I understood correctly. In that moment, they have handed me the most valuable intelligence possible. They cannot tolerate uncertainty in my perception of them. Which means my perception of them is something they will work to manage. Which means I can use my perception as a tool. By the time I've shaken your hand, I know whether I'm going to invest in you. Most people are not worth the investment. But some of you are. And when I identify one of you, I begin phase 2. Here is what I need you to understand before we go further. Everything I just described, the scan, the observation, the ambiguity test, happens in environments you consider safe. Workplaces, friend groups, families, relationships. The person running this assessment on you is not a stranger. They are almost certainly someone you already trust. Let that sit for a moment. Now let me show you what happens next. Part 2. The mirror. I become exactly what you needed, and you will never notice it happening. Once I've identified you as worth pursuing, I make one fundamental decision. What does this person need that they aren't getting enough of? Not what they want. Wants are shallow. Needs are structural. Needs are the things that, when met, create a sensation of finally, of recognition, of this person understands me in a way others don't. This is not psychology as I learned it from a textbook. This is psychology as Machiavelli practiced it, the cold, systematic reading of human need as a map to human behavior. So I observe. I listen. Not for what you say, but for what you say too much. The person who repeatedly mentions how nobody really listens to them needs to be heard. The person who makes self-deprecating jokes about being overlooked needs to be seen. The person who over-explains their decisions needs to be understood without judgment. The person who talks about how exhausting everyone else is needs to feel like someone finally gets it. These are not flaws. These are human needs. But they are also, from where I'm standing, entry points. Because once I know what you need, I become that. Not immediately. Not obviously. Gradually. Precisely. Like a frequency slowly tuning itself to match yours. I listen when others don't. I remember the small things, the name of your sister, the project that stressed you out 2 weeks ago, the coffee you mentioned preferring. And when I bring these things back at the right moment, you feel something you may never have articulated but immediately recognize. This person pays attention to me. Robert Cialdini called this the principle of liking. We are profoundly, almost embarrassingly influenced by people who seem genuinely interested in us. Not because we are naive, because human beings are wired for recognition. We evolved in small groups where being truly seen by another person was survival critical. I am exploiting an evolutionary advantage. And I am very patient. Here is the thing about the mirror phase that most people never realize. You will remember this period as the best part of knowing me. You will refer back to it later. He used to be so different. She understood me like no one else ever had. She did understand you. Perfectly. That was never the goal. The goal was to become structurally necessary to you. To weave myself into the architecture of your daily psychological experience, so that when I begin to change, the removal of what I provided creates a pain you will work to resolve. You will work to get back what you had. That is phase 3. I need to pause here, because some of you are recognizing something right now. Not a person you're afraid of meeting. A person you have already met. A relationship that began exactly like what I just described. An intensity of attention and recognition that felt different from anything before it. A connection that felt almost too perfectly suited to what you needed. And then, at some point, something shifted. If you're feeling that recognition, stay with it. Because what I'm about to describe next is why the shift happened. And understanding it is the only protection that exists. Part 3. The Withdrawal. Now I take away what I gave you. And watch what you do to get it back. The trap does not close with cruelty. Amateur manipulators use threats. They use anger. They use punishment. That is not how a sophisticated operation works. The trap closes with withdrawal. One day, without warning, without explanation, I become slightly less available. The attention that was consistent becomes intermittent. The warmth that was reliable becomes unpredictable. The person who always listened now seems distracted. Nothing dramatic. No confrontation. Just less. And here is what happens inside you when this occurs. Your brain, which has been receiving a consistent signal of recognition and connection, suddenly registers an interruption. And because that signal had become structurally important to your daily psychological state, the interruption registers as a threat. Not a conscious threat. A neurological one. Behaviorally, this manifests as anxiety. A heightened focus on me. A review of recent interactions. What did I do? Did I say something wrong? Did I change? You start working to restore what was there before. And this is the moment the power dynamic inverts completely. You are now the one pursuing. You are now the one managing my perception. You are the one trying to recreate the conditions of the early phase, the phase you remember as real. And here is the coldest truth in this entire video. That early phase was the performance. This, your desperate attempt to recreate it, this is the reality I wanted all along. Your compliance. Your management of my feelings. Your willingness to overlook things that, before the attachment was built, you would have walked away from immediately. Machiavelli wrote in chapter 17 that the bond of love is broken whenever it serves the interest of the other, but fear is maintained by a dread of punishment that never leaves. I have created something more sophisticated than fear. I have created longing. And longing is more durable than fear, more motivating than obligation, and more invisible than any obvious manipulation. You don't know you're trapped. You think you're in a relationship. That is the design. Now I'm going to stop. Because I've been speaking as the manipulator for 12 minutes. And I want you to notice something. At no point did the manipulator I described seem obviously evil. At no point was there a clear moment where you would have known to run. Every phase had a perfectly reasonable surface explanation. Someone who is observant, someone who is attentive, someone who goes through a difficult period. This is not an accident. This is the architecture. And now I'm going to give you the only thing that actually dismantles it. Not a list of warning signs. Something more fundamental than that. The identity twist. Now look at this from the other side. Here is what I need you to understand. The hunter's playbook only works on someone who has an unmet need significant enough to be exploited. That is not a criticism. That is a human condition. Every person alive has unmet needs. Every person alive wants to be seen, understood, valued. The question is not whether you have these needs. The question is, who is the primary provider of those needs in your life? If the answer is primarily external, if the sensation of being seen, understood, and valued depends primarily on how specific people respond to you, then you have an opening. And openings get used. Carl Jung identified this decades before the language of manipulation was formalized. He wrote that the person who has not done the work of self-recognition, who does not know their own value from the inside, will always be vulnerable to the person who offers to provide that recognition from the outside. Because you cannot independently verify something you cannot internally feel. Machiavelli's most important line on this subject was not about princes or enemies. It was this, and I'm paraphrasing from chapter 19. The person who depends on others for their security has already surrendered the fortress. Your psychological fortress is your self-knowledge. Your clarity about your own worth, independent of any external validation. Your capacity to sit in uncertainty, in ambiguity, without needing to resolve it through the approval of the person creating it. This is not coldness. This is not isolation. This is the specific internal structure that makes the hunter's playbook fail at the scan phase, before anything else can begin. The manipulator at the door runs the ambiguity test. They create a moment of unclear reaction, and watch if you work to resolve it. The person who has done the work of self-recognition doesn't work to resolve it. Not because they don't notice it. Because they don't need to. Their sense of themselves does not depend on how that specific person is reading them in that specific moment. And when the manipulator encounters that, when the ambiguity test produces nothing, they move on. Not because you were hostile. Not because you were suspicious. Because you gave them nothing to work with. An unreadable person is an untargetable person. How to become untargetable? 3 things that close every entry point. First, identify your primary unmet need and name it precisely. Not "I want to feel loved." That is too broad to protect. What specifically do you need that you aren't getting enough of internally? Recognition of your intelligence? Acknowledgement of your effort? The experience of being chosen? Name it with precision. Because the need you cannot name is the need you cannot protect. The manipulator identified it in 3 minutes. You should be able to name it yourself. Second, build tolerance for unresolved ambiguity. The ambiguity test works because most people cannot tolerate the discomfort of not knowing how they are being perceived. They will do significant psychological and behavioral work to resolve that uncertainty. Practice not resolving it. When someone's reaction to you is unclear, let it stay unclear. Do not explain yourself more. Do not soften your position. Do not seek confirmation. Let the ambiguity exist and notice that you survive it. Every time you survive ambiguity without chasing resolution, you close an entry point. Third, notice intensity of early attention as information, not just experience. The mirror phase feels extraordinary because it is extraordinary in the literal sense. It exceeds what is normal for the stage of relationship you are in. Genuine connection builds gradually because genuine understanding takes time. When someone seems to understand you with unusual depth and speed, when the attunement feels almost uncanny, that is not necessarily evidence of a soulmate. It is evidence of a skilled observer. Not every person who pays close attention is a manipulator. But every manipulator pays close attention. Use that as a filter. Not to be closed, but to be awake. So here is conclusion, the final reveal. I'm going to end this where I began it. I told you I was going to show you the playbook from the inside. From the manipulator's perspective. And I did. But here is the real reason I did it that way. The manipulator's power is invisibility. As long as you can only see their behavior from the outside, as a series of confusing, hurtful, inexplicable actions, you remain vulnerable. You keep trying to understand what went wrong. What you did. What changed? Nothing changed. It was designed from the scan. When you can see it from the inside, when you understand the logic of each phase, the purpose of the withdrawal, the function of the early attention, the design becomes visible. And a visible trap cannot hold you. Machiavelli wrote that the prince who understands how fortresses are taken is the same prince who knows how to defend them. You have just spent 15 minutes inside the mind of someone who wants to take yours. Now you know the method. Now you know the entry points. Now you know what to remove. The hunter just showed you the playbook. Close it. And walk away untargetable. If you made it here, you've just seen something that most people spend years trying to understand after the fact. You saw it before. That is not a small thing. The next video will take you deeper into the psychology of power, manipulation, and the architecture of human behavior. You already know where to find us.